Hey guys, Mr. G here again, back for round two. Hopefully you guys were able to watch the first video and you liked it. I got some good comments from you guys, from Mira and Daisy. And I saw that Aurora subscribed to me, my first subscriber. It's a pretty big deal. All right, so I think I'm ready for round two. We're gonna be jumping back into the packet. This one will be a little bit shorter today. I basically just wanna go through the next like 2, maybe 3 pages of the packet, but it won't be quite as long of a video. Just so you guys know, there'll be 2 more videos posted after this this week, so Wednesday and Thursday, and that'll leave you guys Friday to complete any assignments for me and those types of things. Remember, there's 2 assignments this week. If you can get onto the AP College Board, I know some of you guys are having trouble with that, but if you can get onto the College Board website, your multiple choice are there, but also on the team site, your short answer questions for week 2 are posted there. And make sure you guys try to do both of those before Friday at midnight. If it's a little bit later than that, no worries. You know I'm gonna accept those things. With that being said, jumping into the packet, we left off talking about Liberty bonds here yesterday. So we're gonna jump to the next page. And we're gonna start with basically continuing to talk about U.S. government actions during World War I. And remember, this is what the AP exam likes to ask about. They're not going to ask you about the events taking place over in Europe, any famous battles in World War I, or even like the causes of World War I. Remember, it's good to know those for background, but like the assassination of the Archduke and those types of things, probably not going to be asked about, more just details if you guys are doing contextualization for an essay or something like that. More importantly than that, though, the AP people like to ask about the actions of the U.S. government during World War I, and that's where we're picking up here today. So if you guys could turn to the Lever Food and Fuel Control Act. So we already talked about a couple of the things that the U.S. government did at the start of the war. We talked about the draft already, the Committee on Public Information that's going to create all that propaganda and those types of things that the government wants the people to hear. But one of the things that we talked about yesterday was the idea of rationing. And that's sort of where the Lever Food and Fuel Act comes in. It promoted the idea that the government should be in charge of regulating prices on some of the more necessary items. Food, fuel, transportation, that the government should be very hands-on during a time of war in regulating prices on those necessities. To prevent businesses from taking advantage of the situation. Also, again, to make sure that the soldiers have everything that they need in order to be successful in fighting this war. And that's actually where we also see the creation of something called the Food Administration. So you guys might want to write that underneath. The Lever Food and Fuel Control Act is the Food Administration. Because the Food Administration, which is sort of linked to this Lever Act, that's the organization that's going to be known for this concept of rationing. All right. The Food Administration is basically the organization that's promoting the production of food, but also conserving the supply of food. And that's where the rationing piece comes in, right? As a responsible American, even though you're not off fighting in the war in Europe, you do have a responsibility here at home to make sure that you are limiting your use of these foods so that there's plenty of food for our soldiers overseas. So again, everybody has to do their part. So that Food Administration is sort of part of the Lever Act. Okay, let's jump to another one, right? The next one down is the National Security League. Now this one, you guys don't need to know a whole lot about this one because the National Security League was actually started right at the beginning of World War I while we were still neutral. Okay, but the National Security League, the primary purpose of it was to promote compulsory military training. It was almost as if this National Security League sort of knew that at some point we were going to get involved in World War I and we needed to be prepared. So they talked about compulsory military training for citizens, just in case war was to happen, but also just increasing the size of the military, increasing the size of the army was one of the things that they promoted. All right, again, they wanted the military to be ready just in case war was to happen. And of course, when we did enter into the war, this National Security League ends up looking like a pretty smart organization. Okay, those ones are kind of quick. The next one's big, real big. Okay, the Espionage Act. Now, this one's passed by Congress in 1917. The Espionage Act is going to raise some serious questions about civil liberties during times of war, right? Because we know that the First Amendment gives us freedom of speech. But what the Espionage Act said, now mind you, this was passed by Congress only 2 months after the United States entered into World War I. So this was pretty quick. And the goal was to prohibit any interference with military operations. So any action by someone in the United States that interfered with the success of the military, all right, it was meant to prohibit that. It also banned the support of U.S. enemies. Okay, so we're fighting Germany, for instance, in World War I. Anybody that was outspoken about supporting Germany, you're essentially supporting the enemy. That can also be seen as illegal. But the other one was this idea of banning the promotion of being insubordinate in the military. So anyone that defied the military, let's say you defied the draft, anyone that spoke out against the draft or spoke out against the military, if you were in the military or drafted by the military and you refused to go, these are the kinds of things that the Espionage Act look to prevent. So the Espionage Act is basically going to limit our freedoms as Americans, something like freedom of speech, for instance, because the belief is that there is the possibility that our freedom of speech could ultimately harm the war effort. And if that's the case, then the US government has the right to limit freedom of speech and other civil liberties. As a side note, the punishment for this could be up to $10,000 in a fine or up to 20 years in prison. So this is a pretty big deal, okay? Now, you look at that, you think, man, that's pretty harsh, right? That's pretty intense stuff. Remember, during times of war, there's this concept of necessary and proper. The US government has to do whatever is necessary and proper to promote the war effort and promote US success in the war. It's a time of crisis, so the government has to, in some cases, assert more power than it might normally, okay? What I want you guys to do next, we're gonna pause the video here in a second, all right? Before we get down to this Schenck versus the United States, I want you guys to go to this reading here on the next page, okay? I want you to read about this court case. This court case is one of those like top 10, top 15 court cases in all of US history, so it's definitely one you're gonna wanna know. Take a few minutes. I want you guys to read through the front of this. It does go onto the back. And on the back, you'll also notice some questions on the bottom. So if you guys could pause the video, I'm gonna have you guys work on this for about 5 minutes. And then once you're done and you kind of have these ideas taken care of, start the video back up, okay? Go ahead and pause now. Okay, you back? All right, so let me give you kind of my scoop on this, but you probably picked up quite a few of the details from the reading. Schenck versus the United States is this famous court case, again, during World War I, where Schenck was passing out pamphlets that essentially promoted defying the draft, okay? Now, under the Espionage Act, any promotion of insubordination in the military is illegal and you could be arrested for it. So Schenck is going to be arrested for passing out these pamphlets. He was like on a street corner or something like that, just passing out pamphlets to anyone that would listen. The police roll up, they take a look at the pamphlet and they arrest him. Now this case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And Schenck's defense is basically freedom of speech. First Amendment says, you know, if I don't like something, my opinion, my freedom of expression allows me to make that known to people. Freedom of speech, First Amendment, okay? The Supreme Court is going to look at this case, and they are going to rule that in this case, Schenck's freedom of speech is not protected under the First Amendment. You think, well, how can that be? It's just his opinion. He can do whatever he wants. During times of war, The government has to do whatever is necessary and proper to protect that war effort. Again, it's a time of crisis, okay? Now, here's the phrase you need to know. This is what you guys want to write in your notes here in this section here. All right, right down in here. Make sure you write this phrase in nice and big in quotes. Something called clear and present danger. Clear and present danger. Make sure you write that in here. What the Supreme Court ruled was that when Schenck passed out these pamphlets, he was creating a clear and present danger for the U.S. military and the U.S. war effort, okay? If your freedom of speech creates a danger for other citizens, then your freedom of speech can be limited. Let me give you guys the example that they used in the case. The idea, and I'm sure you guys have heard of this before, yelling fire in a crowded theater. You can't do it. Because if you yell fire in a crowded theater, you might say, well, it's freedom of speech. I just want to yell fire. I'm into that kind of thing, right? So I'm just going to yell it right in the middle of a crowded theater. If people panic and they start rushing towards the exits, and somebody gets trampled, somebody gets injured, somebody dies, right? And they come back to you afterwards and they say, well, there was no fire. Why'd you yell that? That's freedom of speech. Well, your freedom of speech created a clear and present danger for other people. And because of that, that freedom of speech, yelling fire in a crowded theater, is not protected under the First Amendment. Okay, so your rights do not allow you to put other people in danger. All right, so Schenck ends up being convicted under the Espionage Act. And of course, it does raise some serious questions about civil liberties. But what is established, and you're going to want to write this underneath, the effect, what is established by this is that during times of war, civil liberties can be limited by the U.S. government. All right, they can be limited by the U.S. government. All right, last thing that I wanted you guys to take a look at today. So that's it for the government actions during the war, because the war is actually about to come to an end pretty soon. But these are the steps that the U.S. government takes to make sure that the Allies are going to win the war, okay? There's one more thing, though, happening at home, another event that's taking place. Now, I want you guys to look at this map for a second. In fact, I'll probably have you pause the video again. Take just a minute, okay? And just look at the key, look at the title, look at the directions on the map and the colors and those types of things. Take a minute, pause the video, unpause it once you've had a chance to kind of look at this. Okay, you guys back? Okay, now I'm going to hold this up here as if you can read it backwards, but you have it in front of you. During World War I, something called the Great Migration happens. Now, this is a major turning point, and this is what you're going to want to write down here. Major turning point for African Americans in U.S. history, okay? Let's go back a couple steps. After the Civil War, we know that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed, okay? And slavery is abolished. And African Americans are supposed to be guaranteed all the rights of a normal citizen, okay? But you guys also know that that, for the most part, didn't happen because of Jim Crow laws and all these kinds of things, all right? Because their rights ultimately were limited, you probably remember that many African Americans ended up just becoming sharecroppers. There were very limited opportunities for them. They didn't have money to be able to move away and start new lives for themselves. At least most of them didn't. So they ended up staying in the South and working on the same plots of land that many of these African Americans were slaves on originally. This is the moment where they can finally have an opportunity to leave. All right, it's known as the Great Migration. The Great Migration sees millions of African Americans leaving the South, where you can see the arrows coming out of these southern states and moving north. For the most part, the Great Migration is going to focus on major American cities of the North, and you can see them here. There's Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, even Detroit's a little bit smaller there. But you'll notice the cities up here, right? And it says changes in black population and percentage of increase from 1910 to 1920. You say, well, why is this happening during World War I? You guys know the answer to that. You have soldiers going off to fight in World War I. And as those soldiers leave, their factory jobs and jobs in the North, those opportunities will open up. Now, you know that women oftentimes filled those positions. That's where we get like Rosie the Riveter, you know. African Americans are also going to be taking advantage of this opportunity, right? As these factory jobs open, African Americans see this as their opportunity to escape to the north and start new lives. And this is known as the Great Migration. This is a really big deal. Again, finally escaping the South, leaving sharecropping, right? These are the benefits of all this. Of course, there's going to be some negative effects too, because as millions of African Americans start moving north, many of the urban areas of the north, who maybe aren't used to seeing this type of a migration of African Americans, and of course there's going to be racism and discrimination. These types of things are going to happen during this time period. Many African Americans will decide to settle in these urban areas together, which makes sense. We talked about this when immigrants came during the Gilded Age. Oftentimes it makes sense for these groups to settle together so that they can have their sort of sense of community together, feel protected, feel like they belong. But this is a real social change, during World War I, as African Americans are moving north for really the first time, at least on a large scale, in U.S. history. Okay, so the Great Migration, major social change that takes place during World War I. We're going to stop there today, guys. All right, tomorrow we're going to get into the end of the war. We're going to talk about Wilson's 14 points in the Treaty of Versailles, stuff that I know you guys have a little bit of background on already. Don't forget about those assignments. Don't forget to email me if you guys have any questions, or post on the Teams site. Guys, keep up the good work. I'm thinking of you guys, and I hope you and your families are doing well. And if there's anything else you guys need from me, please let me know. I am here to help. All right, I will see you guys tomorrow.